Hi, I'm Katrina, and this is Boldly Challenging Ableism. I'm your host, Katrina Simons. I'm the Community Program Specialist at the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. This program explores various topics that impact people with disabilities in our community. Each episode addresses a different aspect of our society within the context of ableism. Ableism is the prejudice that stems from the belief or belief system that assumes someone is less capable or less worthy because of a real or perceived difference in ability or function. On this program, we hope to answer some questions you may have been afraid to ask, or maybe some you didn't even know you had. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, everybody. For this episode, we talked to Dupree Edwards. Dupree is the lead state advisor on Systems Change at the Institute on Community Integration. We also spoke to Mary Hauff, the director of the Minnesota Inclusive Higher Education Technical Assistance Center, which is also here at ICI. I asked our friend Nick Wilke to join me as a co-host. Nick is an independent living coordinator for the Metropolitan Center for Independent Living. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome, everybody, to our latest episode of Boldly. Today, our topic is we're engaging in inclusive higher education, and our guests today are Dupree Edwards and Mary Hauff. So let's dive into it. To kick us off, Mary, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your role within MIAC?
My name is Mary Hauff, and I am first and foremost a parent, an advocate, and currently the director of the Minnesota Inclusive Higher Education Technical Assistance Center here at the University of Minnesota at the Institute on Community Integration. And just briefly, we are helping expand college, post-secondary education opportunities for Minnesota students with intellectual and developmental disabilities across the state.
That's awesome. And also with us today is Dupree Edwards. Dupree, would you take a couple minutes and just tell our listeners who you are and what you're all about?
Well, thank you, Nick. My name is Dupree Edwards. I'm a self-advocate, a musician, actor, DJ. I'm passionate about the disability community, and the reason why I'm here today is that I want to go to school, college like everybody else. And
it's great to have you here, Dupree.
Thank you both for joining us.
Inclusive higher education is something that everybody needs to know more about.
What is inclusive higher ed?
Inclusive higher education really got its start in 2008 when the Higher Education Opportunity Act was reauthorized by the federal government, and that created a pathway for students with intellectual disabilities to be able to go to college. And really key because there have been barriers, and students with intellectual disabilities have not been able to go to college simply because of the admission requirements and the supports that they need to be successful in college. And so when they passed that legislation, they also passed some funding and some other criteria in terms of who would be eligible to go to college through an inclusive higher education initiative. And so that's really where it started, and it's steadily grown since 2008.
I'm wondering, Mary, do you have a working definition of intellectual disability that you like to use when you're referring to your program?
We're a technical assistance center, so we are helping colleges and universities across the state of Minnesota to expand enrollment to include students with, and really we should talk about intellectual and developmental disabilities. Technically, the federal law says intellectual disabilities, but there are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that meet the criteria that can be enrolled and go to college through an inclusive higher ed initiative.
And I actually knew it wasn't a program. I apologize for calling it that.
What does a successful initiative look like, Mary?
Well, high quality, best practice. When we're talking to prospective students, families, and faculty and staff at colleges and universities, we talk about inclusive higher education is basically just widening the pathway to post-secondary to college so that it includes students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So they're doing the same thing that any other college student is doing, right? The key differences are there's additional advising in terms of as part of the support, and utilization of peer mentors for support, and then program of study can look a little bit different, where it includes more of an emphasis on some of the employment, because the whole goal of inclusive higher education is not only to widen that pathway so students with intellectual and developmental disabilities can go to college, but they can earn a meaningful credential that's aligned with what their career goals are, and to achieve competitive integrated employment upon graduation.
That's awesome.
Excellent. Dupree, are there any higher education opportunities that you wished you had when you were younger?
You know what, Katrina? I didn't even have that choice.
You didn't even? Okay.
I didn't even have that choice. And that's why I was kind of, what I said earlier in the segment, that I was very, kind of aggressive with Mary when I talked to her about it, because I'm just like, where was this program when I was, in Transition Plus? If I had the opportunity to be able to go to college and, T Plus or any of those things that I was in did tell me about these options. At that time, my team wanted me, and this was 2011, that my team wanted me to actually have a job, to make money, to get there. And, I went on a tour on day programs. But then I got to my day program that I am in now, Partnership Resources Incorporated. And I just have been there for now almost 15 years. And I met Mary at the graduate workshops, and she just reminded me that, oh wow, college was out there. And she was showing, and she was saying her daughter, and it just frustrated me. I'm just like, what the heck? Where was this program? Where were these things? And what we talking about as I've been working with her, we want to try to educate the K through 12 about this situation, because the future of people, we don't want people to go to day programs or shelter workshops out there.
Dupree, can I interrupt really quick and just let people know that a day program is somewhere where people can go during the day to spend their time. Typically not in an inclusive setting, although there are some providers who sort of have a day program, but they go out in the community and stuff. But typically day programs are not in the community, and you're all alone and you're not included. And that is actually against the Olmstead Act, which is something else that we're not going to talk about in this episode. But so a day program is kind of a segregated setting for people with disabilities to spend their time during the day.
I'd like to just add in, one, Dupree wasn't being aggressive. He was being assertive, and he was being a strong advocate, not only for himself, but for others, because older students, should have that same opportunity to go to college. And just because it wasn't something that was accessible or available, or there was awareness of when they were in transition or finishing transition, doesn't mean that they shouldn't have the right or the opportunity to go to college today. And so somebody like Dupree is helping us be better in terms of the Technical Assistance Center, and making sure that the work that we're doing is centered on all students. And the other thing that I'll say is that Minnesota has an attainment goal that's in our state statute. And it, in essence, says that any Minnesotan, or every Minnesotan between the ages of 25 and 44, actually it's 70% is the goal, but so people between the ages of 25 and 44 will have attained some sort of a post-secondary credential. And there is nothing in the statute that excludes Minnesotans with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we know with the statistics that fewer than 3% of Minnesotans with intellectual and developmental disabilities have access to college here in Minnesota. And so it's woefully short of that 70% attainment goal. And that's part of what we're striving for in expanding the college opportunities across the state, so that students, whether it's somebody like Dupree or my daughter Jean, that if they want to go to college, that they have that opportunity to go to college and earn that post-secondary credential.
Do you know where that 3% ranks with the rest of the nation?
Across the country, it's about that same percentage.
Okay, so it's real low
And
everywhere.
it's low everywhere. It depends on what state you're in terms of the opportunities. But yeah, that I think we were the first state that was talking or putting it in that kind of context. But I now see Think College as the National Technical Assistance Center, and they're now using similar data, but nationwide.
So did I hear you right that every single state has this type of initiative?
I think there's just one state, Wyoming, that does not have an inclusive higher education alternative or option for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it depends on what state you're in terms of how many options that are available. Some states, and part of it has to do with how it's been supported and funded, either through state appropriations or through the federal funding. They're called TIPSID grants, and that's a federal funding stream that has helped establish inclusive higher education options across the country. So it's grown from zero to today. There's it's over 300 across the country.
Mary, is there anybody in the other states that are doing what you're doing or you're going to do, what you want to do in Minnesota?
There are similar states that are doing something similar, nothing that's exactly the same, right? And part of that is intentional on our part, where we crafted state legislation in 2022. It passed ultimately in 2023 to establish a technical assistance center and also competitive grant funding. And we did that keeping in mind that we have a really strong Office of Higher Education state agency here in Minnesota. And so rather than duplicate the work that they do, we crafted the legislation to wrap around. So the TA Center, and why we're based here at the Institute on Community Integration, is because of the expertise and the resources that ICI has centered around intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we're tapping into something rather than sort of having to start from scratch. And then the second thing that the TA Center has done is, and this was borne out through some legislative reports that were put together over around 2015, that a lot of the colleges and universities, one, they didn't understand intellectual and developmental disabilities. It wasn't their typical student profile in terms of who was being admitted or enrolled. And then they didn't understand inclusive higher education. So that's the role of the TA Center, is to help with the understanding and the resources relative to intellectual and developmental disabilities, and then the expertise to help colleges and universities plan and expand enrollment for an inclusive higher education initiative. And then the second thing that came out of the legislative reports about 7-8 years ago was that the colleges and universities didn't have the funding. And so that's part of that information helped us establish the competitive grant funding, which is this ongoing state appropriation, so that we can provide that funding for that, what I like to describe as initial startup money, right? So that until they get their enrollments up to self-sustainability, then the competitive grant will help fill that gap in terms of funding.
Thank you for sharing, Mary. I want to transition back to Dupree. How did you know that, you could do all the things that you've been able to do? I know like more education, more higher ed is the goal, but just to be able to approach that stuff, you have to believe that you can, right? Right,
yeah.
So tell our listeners a little bit more about your drive.
I've learned from a lot of people. I think I had a great support system around me, and I think a lot of people taught me a lot of things, especially with deployment. Mary's teaching me about the education. There were staff back in the day that teaching me about positive behavior supports. So I built the knowledge, but I just didn't really have the advocacy type down because I wasn't very on topic when I was advocating for things. I didn't, do that. I mostly where I could use my voice and drive was mostly radio. You'd be on the microphone. You know what I mean? This is how I speak to the people back in the day. I speak to the people. I created my own radio show to build awareness, to talk about my issues, talk about my feelings, talk about that. But as I got into the adult world, as you said, it's just other people guided me, build wisdom, and I'm glad that I met Mary Hauff because when I first met her, I didn't really care about school anymore. But then she got to the point where she's like, yeah, everybody can go to school. And then I started to do it, and she got me to convince to be able to go to school and go to college to say, yeah, because there's a lot of people out there that and some people that are families that never been to college, that never graduated from high school. You could be the first there. But I just wanted to make sure that I go to college and get the degree. But I did the job thing. I've completed that. I've held down a job everywhere I can. I hold employment. I build it. I've grown, and I've used that drive. Now it's time to go to the things that I didn't have. And that's what I'm working for, to go to college. Now, I've told Mary this before. I'm not going to college to college to college to college. I'm going to college to actually, do my trade, do something that I've trained in. So I'm not going to go to college to learn math or algebra or writing or things like that. I'm going to college specifically to learn about Shakespeare. Okay? She passed a bill that accommodation bills that she could do. If you want your degree, you could go to specifically for your trade or specifically for your degree.
And Dupree, I want you to know that my last question for you is, what advice would you give someone that hasn't had the opportunity to engage within higher education? And you're like, yes, you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mary, do you think you can tell us a little bit more about some of the barriers that we're facing to having inclusive higher ed be more prevalent?
Yeah, two of the main barriers I already mentioned, and we tried to address that through the legislation and establishing of the TA Center. And that is for faculty and staff at universities and colleges to learn about and understand intellectual and developmental disabilities and inclusive higher ed and what's possible. I think one of the other barriers on campuses is the acceptance of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities as capable learners and people that can, in fact, go to college, right? There's sort of this stereotype of who a college student is, and that's sort of an attitudinal change that needs to and shift that needs to continue to be worked on. So that's at the Institute of Higher Ed. I think a big barrier, it crosses over all key stakeholders, is just simply the awareness. So many people do not know. Students, families, educators, faculty and staff, when you're talking about institutes of higher ed, just simply don't have an awareness that inclusive higher education even exists. And so that's a big part of our work, is that raising of the awareness. We offer learning community events and community of practice gatherings to help raise that awareness. And we have in September our annual conference coming up.
So I have another question for Mary. Obviously, there's so much momentum here for a lot of people, and a lot of passion around what could be possible for individuals. Have there been moments in the last few years, Mary, that you've been really, really proud of, that you want to highlight just for our program here in Minnesota?
When we passed the legislation in 2023, that was a big milestone, right? That knocked down two huge barriers And it's something that other states contact us, and colleagues of ours that are across the country are looking at and considering modeling or trying to do something in their particular state similar to what we're doing.
And then you talked about attitudinal barriers. What would you say to people who think that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't need to go to college or shouldn't go to college?
It's really not any different than anybody else, Katrina. Students with intellectual and developmental disabilities are capable learners, and for many, they want to continue their education into post-secondary. And why is that important? That's important because that's the gateway to independence. It's the gateway to a lot of the informed choice in terms of pursuing the career of your choice, and being in a job that's competitive integrated employment, so you're earning a reasonable, livable wage. I mean, it just is a gateway to all sorts of positive things in terms of the quality of your adult life.
Could we turn that question to Dupree?
Yeah. What would you say to someone who says we don't need inclusive higher ed?
Oh, wow. I would tell them that, we do need it. We do need inclusive, because that's the number one goal that we try to be, is inclusive, is to be together. And what people, we want to go to college like everybody else, and this program or technical assistant is helping them to achieve that, to go to college, anybody else. So when these colleges start to happening, programs start to happening, you might be able to live on the dorm. You might be able to go to classes, do the college life that nobody never experiences. So I don't think anybody wants to pass up this opportunity, and we're not just talking about people that are 18 to 26, but we're talking about all people that want to go to college. And it's and I've read the standards that they wrote, and it's really good. It's just like you're going to college, and that's the whole widen the pathway, as we're going to talk about next month at the conference, is the whole theme of the thing. And I'm going to host it, by the way. And so and that's what it is. We're trying to get people to widen the pathway to be able to go to college like everybody else. And like she said, the goal is to get them to get a degree and to break down the barriers of competitive integrated employment. Now, what does people with intellectual disabilities complain about? I don't have no money. I want to be able to have money. I want to be able to pay higher wages. Once you get to college, you got to go to college. You get paid higher wages. You get to have a livable wage. You get to be able to do the things that you want. You get to be able to have the stuff that you have. So that's how they're breaking down the employment type of barriers right now. So that's something that that's really cool about this program. And I mean, widen the path, everything. So, but yeah, it's really good, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
It's about changing expectations, not only for people with disabilities, but also society. Okay, because there's no reason why anybody wouldn't want the opportunity to seek this out and see how much further they could go.
Well, and there's no reason to assume that anybody should have to stop improving at the age of 18 or 21. Everybody, no matter how old you are, no matter if you have a disability or you don't have a disability, everybody wants to continue learning. People are lifelong learners.
I think that's a valid point. The other thing that I'll just say is part of what we're systemic change that we're trying to help create is that high school to employment, right? So many students or people without disabilities, there's that presumption of high school to post-secondary, then employment. And while some of that's shifting, it's really important in terms of that post-secondary credential, because again, that opens up so much more choice for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to truly earn that credential and pursue the career of their choice, not simply just going from high school to a menu of just a few options of these are the jobs that we have available for you, right? Which has nothing to do with their interest or their strengths.
You guys, you've been such excellent guests. I want to thank you. I want to thank you both for coming on. Thank you for spending the time. I really appreciate it. We'd love to hear some updates after the conference, perhaps.
Yeah, let us know how it goes.
All right.
Will do. Thank you
All right.
so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having us.
You're so welcome.
Boldly Challenging Ableism is a co-production of AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. For more information, please visit ici.umn.edu.